Okay. So last week we talked about some concepts in Python, and then we shared the text we'll be using and asked us to try to do the exercises in chapter 1. We first of all talk about how to install Python, the IDE we are going to be using, and then we talked just a little bit about variables. So I don't know if anybody was able to solve those exercises, or maybe while solving them had a challenge.
Sorry, I wasn't here last week.
No problem. There were people that were here last week. Benjamin, are you saying something? Shalom. Are you people here? I'm seeing up to like 8 people. Nobody is saying anything.
Yeah, sorry, I also wasn't here at the last class, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your screen is not coming up.
Okay. In the last class, and when we are having class, people were not talking so much. The truth is, we need to be talking so that we can know if you're following or not. And why we need that is so that we know how to move. Okay? Because in the end of the day, we want us to know and understand the foundation of Python. If you understand it, there are many things you can build on it. It's like you want to build a house. The first thing must be the foundation. If you don't get and grasp these concepts, you find out that by the time you begin to go into deeper things, you will struggle. So we want to know who is following, what areas you're having challenges, so that we can make good progress. But this one, nobody is responding. It's just like you turn on your device and then you just don't speak, don't do anything. I mean, okay, can someone tell us if Python is dynamically typed or statically typed?
Can I try?
Sure.
Okay. I think it's dynamically typed because you get to decide what naming style, sort of, but within the guidelines of, how should I say that? Within the guidelines of the naming convention for Python, but you have your right to give whatever name you wish. And whenever you want to call, you can call it up at the cost of your running your program. I don't know.
Okay, that's a good try. Any other person has something else to say? I'm sharing my screen. Can you see it?
Yeah, for loops.
Yeah, I can see.
Okay.
Yes, we can see.
So these are the exercises that you're supposed to do in chapter 1. It's like nobody did it. Did anybody do? We'll ask again. So nobody did it. Wow. If you didn't do it now, how are we sure that you understood what chapter 1 is talking about? Maybe we'll just go back and walk it through. But you see, it's just like dragging us back. Nobody is doing the exercises. Doesn't make sense. That's the truth. There's a reason why we say you should do it, because we don't want to be teaching and teaching and teaching. We want to be teaching and then it's entering, you're understanding it. The only way you understand this thing will not even take you to read this exercise chapter. Will not take you 20 minutes, to be frank. It's not that big a chapter. You finish reading what it's saying and then attempt to solve those exercises. That way, you would have some challenges. It will force you to think, to be analytical, to ask yourself, how can I achieve this? That's where the learning starts. Okay, if you really want to learn Python, you're ready to get your hands working. Without you doing it, you're not learning. Highest thing, you'll just know it in theory. Oh, there's Python. Python can do A. You can do for loop, can do that. But when you're faced with a task, you will not know where to start from. Maybe you want to start checking things up before you even type anything, which is not good. While we are speaking this way, one of the things we plan to do with this class is to ensure that we get people that can be job ready, which means any person that follows through, what we can promise the person is in the next 3 to 6 months, you can begin applying for jobs, attending interviews, and being confident you can answer the questions they are going to ask you. No matter how they twist it, you'll be able to follow through. But then, if the development aspect is not there, and only the theory is there, you cannot, believe me, you can't. Because when you go for some interview, they will tell you, open up your Visual Studio Code or any IDE of your choice. And the person will tell you something, do it. Just like you're watching me, that's how they'll be watching you, you start doing. You won't even have the chance to maybe check somewhere. As you're doing, they're checking, right? So if the thing know their body, how can you do it? And even if you do, they'll ask you to explain. They'll throw some questions in. If you don't have the understanding of the concept, the basic concept, you see that you can't explain. Just like at least today, someone was able to talk about dynamically typed for Python, which is good. But you need to practice. That cannot be overemphasized. I think we have practiced this thing now, we'll have the confidence to just go into follows now and start going. So last class, we looked at installing Python. We showed you how to install. So we asked again, how many of you have installed Python? Let me start from there.
Yeah, I have Python now.
I've done that.
2 people. Only 2 people have installed. The rest, you've not done it, or I don't know why you're not
I've
responding.
also done it. I've also installed.
That's 3. We're having, how many of us are here? 10. 3 over 10 is 4. Sorry, it's not like we're using hard language. We're just trying to encourage ourselves with the truth, right? So we have 10 people in the class. Only 3 have installed Python, and we are learning Python. Is it that you don't have a computer to use or a device to use? We'll just continue, but we'll still look into this further. Then the IDE, the integrated development environment we said we'll be using for this course is Visual Studio Code, which I assumed in the last class that most of you already have because of the class you're attending in front end, which that's HTML and CSS, we are using VS Code. Is there anybody that does not have VS Code?
No, the one I installed is Python.
Okay. What about the IDE?
I thought he said PyCharm. Is it PyCharm he said?
You
Or
said PyCharm. Sorry, I didn't. Oh, it's also a good one. I didn't hear you. I thought you said Python. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So there is PyCharm is another IDE. Yes, that's good. It mustn't be Visual Studio Code. It's just that that's one we are using here. There are many others. So let me just follow this chapter 1 as if we are going through it, because nobody was able to say he has gone through it, right? If we've not done chapter 1, we can't do chapter 2. So first of all, I'll start from a first program. So I'll follow what they said we should do, which is what we are supposed to do individually. I don't have VS Code. My Windows with how to download brackets. Okay. I don't know bracket, but BRACKET. Let's see. Okay, I see. Okay, that's good. If you're comfortable with that one, that's okay. Someone's hand was up in the BC also. Okay, so in the first program they're talking about, we have temp equal to eval input, and it said enter the temperature in Celsius. Okay, and it goes ahead to print. And Fahrenheit, that is 9 divided by 5 times 10 plus 2. Okay, so let's save it and run and see what happens. So remember, in the last class, we said to run a Python script. You go
You
to
run
the
9 divided by 9.
Sorry?
You wrote 9
9
divided by 9.
Thank you. So that's 9 divided by 5. You go to the terminal. Let me close this terminal, assuming the terminal is not here. To open your terminal, you click on these 3 dots. If you know, I've divided my screen, so we have Python on one side, the book in the other side. If not, maybe you would have seen everything here. So these 3 dots for other things are not shown on this side. So I click, you go to terminal, then you go to new terminal. So the terminal pops up. That's how you open the terminal if it's not showing on Visual Studio Code. Now, you run a Python file. You just type Python and the name of the file. Let's save the file. Day2.py. So that's it, and I press enter. Now, when I press enter, if you can see, enter a temperature in Celsius. It's asking me now to enter a temperature in Celsius. Then I put 25. I hit enter. In Fahrenheit, that is 77.0. Now, these things that are printed in my terminal is what this code in this file is doing. Now let me break down the code for understanding. If you observe, the first part is temp, is a variable, and we are saying it is equal to eval input. Let me remove eval first. So go down to what's happening there. So if you watch, the first function is input. And then inside of input, there is a certain message that is typed here. I remove it. So this input, let's say we're starting at first. Input is just empty like that. Input on its own is used to collect input from the terminal. Collects data from the terminal. Now inside input, you can write a text, but you have to put it in parentheses. Quotation mark, yeah? Sorry, quotation mark. You have to put in quotation mark. Either single or double. This now, I type is a single quotation mark, or you use double, which is this. Anyone you use in Python, it works. Single and double are used to denote string. Okay, so anyone you use work, then you type something in between those strings. Those are in quotation mark, you have to type something. So in this case, we type enter a temperature in Celsius. This message that is typed in input is the message, the first message that will show when you run your program. Like when I run that file, you see enter a temperature in Celsius. Anything you want the user to do, you type it here. If you want the user, maybe your program wanted the user to enter his name, you could say, please write your name. When the script is run, input will print it out for the user on the terminal, and then wait for the user to enter a value. So in this case, we are told to enter a temperature in Celsius, and then we put 25. When you press enter, its input collects this data. You're still just in line 2 of your code. It's not going anywhere. When input collects the data, it's going to store it in this variable temp, because once you put equal to in Python, it's an assignment. So you're assigning a value to a variable it's equal to. So when they say temp equal to, whatever is on the right-hand side will then be equal to or stored in the variable on the left-hand side. Okay? So input helps you collect values from the terminal and store it there. In the example, something else, input is wrapped in something else. I want to say wrap. It's like someone putting parentheses around input. And this other function is called eval. Right? So eval is another function which input was used to wrap input, meaning that whatever input brings from the terminal, the next place is going to deliver it to will be eval. And when you now begin to see something like this, you now begin to understand that there are certain functions that can take other functions as their own input parameter. So when input has collected from the terminal, it's going to dump it into eval. So by the time I type 25 and hit enter, what really happens is all of this here, the whole input statement becomes 25 like this when it's evaluating it. So the whole input has asked a question and gotten a number from the user, but that number is 25, is wrapped in eval. Now, what is this eval? Eval now is a function that evaluates the input, but the input must be numerical for eval to work. If you type something that is not a number, if you type a string, then eval is going to have a problem. What does eval do? Eval determines if it's going to store it as an integer or a float. An integer or a float. So, okay, let me go through integer, float, string, Boolean, which are like the basic data types. Because I first of all assume we know them, but let me just act as if we don't know them. So for those who don't understand, when we are saying integer, float, string, now in Python, there are different primary data types. The first one we'll talk about string. So strings are values that are like text. And for you to write them in Python, like I said earlier, you can have something like this is a string, but it has to be quotation mark, either double or single. This is another string. Of course, we are supposed to assign them to a variable, so they are not just on their own. They'll be stored in a variable. So these two are string data type, right? They're string. So in string, you can type anything, any symbol. You can put them in your string. It doesn't matter. Any expression, you can just type it, but you have to be in quotation. That's string. Okay. Then we also have integer. Which, for instance, let's say I now equal to 1. Integer a whole number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth. Positive, negative integers, just whole numbers, right? And then we have float. I say f now equal to 1.2. Numbers that have decimal places, 1.0, 1.2, 1.777, 3.14, all those type of digits are floats, right? They are floats. Then integer whole number 1, 2, 3, like that, and then float. Then we also have another one that's Boolean. Okay, Boolean now is either true or false. So some variables. Let me see T. Let me just assign T equal to true, F1 equal to false. So they could either be true or false. Those ones we call them Boolean. Okay, so all of this just to ensure that we're on the same page with string, integer, float, and Boolean. Now, what does eval do? Anything the user types when eval, input like we are talking about collects from the user. And when input collects from the user, it's going to put it in eval. Eval will then evaluate it to either be an integer or a float. That's what eval is doing there. So if you put 25, eval will make 25 an integer. So to store it temp as an integer. Now, after that is stored, Let me remove all of this, right? So we'll see how our code was in the beginning. Under how our code was. So now, remember here, there was input. Say enter. So this is how the code was, which I was just trying to explain that all of this resolved to whatever you type, and then it's stored in temp. Now, in this particular print statement, you will see that there is two parts separated by a comma. Print on its own is another function in Python that is kind of built in. All these eval, input, print, they are just some functions that are in Python that we can use. We're just calling upon them. Okay. Now, as we go on, you realize that you can also write your own function. Just like all this, you can write your own to use in your code, because the one that comes with Python to you cannot solve all our problems that we want to solve. Then why we are learning how to code is so that later we can also develop some functions to do certain tasks for us. As a programmer, that's what you then do. You write your own new functions. You learn that maybe by the time we get to chapter 13. But these functions we are just using, all these names, eval, input, print, they are functions existing in Python. And if you want to know more about any of them, you can go to your browser, right? And just type it. For instance, if you say print in Python, let's see what comes out. I need the documentation. See, there's a documentation there. If you click on it, you will then begin to see some write-up about print, what it does, and so on and so forth. Why I'm showing this to us is in Python, or a developer in any language, you have to have it in the back of your head that from time to time, you can just go to the internet, type maybe a function or a command you're using, and learn more about it and read more about it. Okay? You can understand it better, because by the time you begin to use this thing in reality, some of these functions, you just see them use. Some people have found that they say they can program, they've done some courses, then they just take some functions, you're using the function. You may not know the limitations of that function you're using because you've not taken time to like read about it when you're using it. So in the end of the day, the limitations that come with it will affect your code. Okay. That's why we just have to have that habit of once in a while, we need to check up something. You Google it, know it's there for you, you read it to understand better. Okay. So now we are now talking about another function that was introduced, which is print. Print is a function in Python. Let me just type it in. And so when it does like this is how you call print. Print on its own. It takes in parameters. It takes in some parameters, which they are like arguments you pass into print. You pass some arguments into print. And then what does print do? Print is doing almost like just say putting it out there on the terminal. Like when we first ran this script and I chose 25, the next line became in Fahrenheit, that is 77, which is what you see we wrote Python to print. In Fahrenheit, that is, so this is one part of the parameters applied to print, comma, this is the second part, which is the second parameter supplied. But this second parameter, it looks like an expression, mathematical expression. So it's evaluated this expression before printing out